Wanted to further things more. They took another route, so what you think we kings for? No angel ever said, yo, who these wings for? Ain't no champion ever said, who these rings for? So don't question what God doing, who you live for. Start accepting who you are and what you do it for. Doing less, doing more, it's really either or. Meet them halfway when one close, here go another door. Here go your dreams, what you running for? Head full of steam, cause you want it, huh? But it's in your genes, you was born a star. Yeah, damn, we done came far. The blessings soon pay off. I don't get a day off. Feel like the playoffs, they like, when y'all gon' take off? Dale got laid off, now we focused on trademarks. We just making hits after hits, no aid off. Now they wanna eat off the same plate that I ate off. They really be brainwashed, I sold ain't for trade-offs. Listen to these verses, these are thoughts that I brainstorm. People do me wrong, but nowadays I just pray for them. I've been under pressure, you can't tell cause I stay calm. I need peace and quiet, all I hear is the rain falls. Now all I see is green like my name was Draymond. ISO the brand and you know we gon' rain on. Shout out to the fans from the jump that stayed on. Rolling every hour of the day till the pain gone. Now every time we drop, yeah, they know that is napalms. ISO. Black, wife too, don't turn this to no controversy, it's my boo. I can make $250,000 off a haiku, and I can make another quarter off it ×2. If it's money on the table, I'll be on it like Bobby or Epic. You peep the aesthetic, it's hard to forget it. I hear you talking, but you're hardly right. I'm the voice of your prototype. Summertime and then why? Summertime and then why? It's too cool. Get the drop tops out. Talking 6 a.m. tea times, 18 with the mayor talking land banks. I waited for it, gotta get mine. Snag a seat up at the table if my man can't. Heading to a meeting, we're familiar with no briefcase. Just my mind in a free state. I got a plan through a vision, but it takes time. I'ma make mine. Summertime and then why?
Are you doing? Next Evolution family, those of you who are watching me on YouTube, welcome to the Next Evolution podcast. I am excited to share with you. I'm glad you are here with me to talk about a very important subject of policing in the African American community, particularly as it relates to things that have happened not only nationally that we've experienced and read about over the past couple of years, but this is a critical topic of conversation that I, as a minister and a pastor and a preacher, am very interested in having this conversation for many different reasons. In particular, because I am a firm believer that the religious organizations should speak to the social ills, particularly, even more so, I believe that churches should speak to the social issues that are happening in their day, in our community, in our world. So once again, before we get going, I want to say thank you for all of you who are watching live here on YouTube or listening to the podcast. I'm absolutely excited that you have continued to support the podcast by showing up, whether it be watching us live on YouTube here or also listening to the Next Evolution podcast page on all your major podcast platforms. And so without further ado, I want to get to the conversation, and I would really love to hear your comments. Please feel free throughout my conversation with you, throughout my dialogue, to put a comment right down below so that we can talk about that. I can answer your questions. I can have feedback with you one-on-one, sort of not face-to-face, but, right here and right now without delay. I definitely am, desiring to have individuals like yourself to comment on what we're talking about because I believe it is important. So the question you're asking is, well, why is this important? Why do I need to have this conversation about policing in the minority community? Well, it is a big issue because of several reasons. Number one is whatever affects one directly affects everyone else indirectly. In other words, if you and I live in a society where policing is seen as a militaristic goal or militaristic action, then that means or implies that anyone at any particular time, right, can fall under this guise of wrong policing or policing that is done unfairly or policing that is not done in the way in which it was designed. Now, here's something critically important for you to understand. As a African American leader, meaning I spend most of my time as a leader in Protestant evangelical churches, some mainline churches, but for the great majority, evangelical denominations and evangelical religious groups. And within those religious groups, it's only a select few of minorities in those groups, particularly maybe 10% in those groups. So if you have a church, let's say of a religious community that comprises of, just say for a lack of just kind of rounding off, not giving big numbers, but numbers that easy for us to grasp. Let's say if you have 100 people in a religious community, probably about 13 of those individuals within that 100 may be from African American or claim African American descent. Okay. And what that typically means is that any religious policies or any religious programming or any religious education that happens in that group is typically void of the cultural context that is represented within that 13% because they are considered a minority, right? Not only minority in community, but minority within that religious organization, which really means they just lump you in with everyone else. And the truth of the matter is that's not healthy if we're going to talk about a increasingly advancing and diverse culture within the American or Western context. I say Western, but then I'm going to say American context in particular, where, like 13 to 14% of African Americans, there may be, there's a percentage that's Jewish Americans. There may be like 5 or 6% of Jewish Americans. Indian Americans may be, I would say 0.2%, right? And we can keep talking about the percentages. But the point that is important here is that if you live in a box and if you only teach and speak and preach from one particular perspective, that is the majority perspective, then you lose the cultural context that is vital to understanding the other people who are in your community, who may not come from your context. So that in and of itself gives credence to the necessity of having a conversation with people and having a conversation with communities that may not be a part of that majority community. Even in we can take this conversation to a conversation that we've had even in the academic setting. Right, there is, I don't know the percentages right now, but the the percentages of African American professors in these major universities, and just as professors in all, is a very low number considering the circumstance, right? So what that means is that people who are considered minorities, their viewpoint or perspective or cultural experience is rarely heard or understood or talked about, right? So here's something important for us to understand. Okay, during the George Floyd and Tamir Rice and all of these kinds of very critical communal issues that came to surface as it related to policing in minority communities, what we recognized very quickly was that policing in minority communities is done and perceived differently. And that's dependent upon who you are talking to. When you talk to a person who is not in a minority community, I would say in a dominant culture, which was the white culture, we will talk about policing differently, right? Police are there to protect. We perceive police are there to protect. Police are there to conserve. Police are there to make sure that, right, everyone is protected and cared for. However, if you ask the same question to people in minority or working class minority communities, the viewpoint is that police are there not to protect, but to keep you in a particular place from other people. So that's a very, very different perspective about policing. So this, when you look at CNN or you look at Fox or any other news station, you have to understand when you see panelists who come on these stations and talk, and they're talking from their perspective, it's because they are viewing the topic from their particular experience, from their lens. And what you will discover is that everyone on the panel is speaking from their particular background. So our job is to listen to what people are saying who are from communities that are different from ours. Now, here's some statistics that I came up with. Recently, there was research done in 2022 of July that asked the question how Black Americans view the use of facial recognition technology by policing as a way of maintaining rule, law, and order. And overwhelmingly, around 1 in 5 Black adults said that the use of facial recognition in policing will be considered unfair. In the U.S., so let me do the statistics. In the U.S., 25% of U.S. adults said it would be less fair, right? 34% says it would be more fair. And then you have 40% who said it doesn't really make a difference. Now I'm going to break that down to ethnic groups or racial groups. I had to use that word, so I'll say ethnic groups. 29% of Black Americans said it would be less fair. Okay. Opposed to 22% who said it would be more fair. In the white community, 23% said it would be less fair. 36% of white Americans said it would be more fair. In the Hispanic community, 25% said it would be less fair. 40% said it would be, in the Hispanic community, said it would be more fair. So Black Americans are less likely than whites or Hispanics to believe that the widespread use of facial recognition technology will make policing more fairer. Okay, now there's 2 responses we can get from that. Number one, The first response we can get from that is, it really doesn't matter what they say, right? It's unconsequential. Or these people are delusional. The same argument that was made when people were saying, when African Americans were saying that, we were being treated unfairly by policing. Like, it was, for instance, it was normal to be pulled over by police. A lot of people thought African Americans were just playing the system with that. But I can tell you, as a minister of the gospel, as a law-abiding citizen, as a military person, I have had those experiences, real life experiences. This is not something that I'm reading from a book. I'm telling you what my experience has been. Well, police officers pulled you over and you're asking the question why, and they have a very lame or very awkward excuse. Like, you went across the line. And I'm like, well, I didn't go across the line. Have you been drinking? I haven't had a drink. As a matter of fact, I don't even drink. Well, tell me, well, can I search your car? Right? What are you talking about right now? Right? So that's the reality. So let me say this. The reason why this conversation is important. It is important because I believe that Christians ought to respond to the powers that be differently than people who consider themselves not a part of the Christian community or followers of Jesus, even more specifically. Romans 13 says this, okay? I'm going to read it for you. It says, let every person be subject to the government authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. Now, I mentioned that scripture verse because it is a scripture verse that many people who are not minorities, who are evangelicals, use to counter argue to minorities and people of color who say that they are being mistreated by authorities, or sort of like what happened in the 60s when the civil rights movement kicked off and people were marching. You had Christians who were saying, people who are part of the Protestant mainline churches were out more, but saying that you guys just need to wait your turn. But here's what I want to say, is that according to this text suggests that the government has limits, and that its job, first and foremost, that they are instituted and put in place for good, not evil. And it has been proven statistically that there are some people in the policing environment, in the policing world, who do not have the best interests of minorities at heart. And so if we're talking about this from a Christian standpoint and from a biblical standpoint, Paul stated that the duties of the police departments is to put terror not on those who are innocent, but those who are guilty. That's important for us to remember. That Paul's criticism is a criticism toward authority being misused. Right? And it's so funny that in that same text, in that same book, in the book of Romans, Paul talks about Pharaoh, who is a person of authority, but he abuses his authority. So when Paul is talking about how you should approach authority, how authority should address you, right? Authority has the responsibility to rule justly. And the moment that they rule unjustly, we are not obligated to listen to that authority. And this is what Dr. King talked about in the 60s. This is what the pacifist preacher Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about under Nazi Germany, right? And I'm not saying we're in Nazi Germany. It's not the point. What I'm saying is that Christians have as much an obligation to stand up for, stand against injustice or the abuse of power, as we have an obligation to fall in line with power, right? So when Paul uses that scripture text, he's literally saying that it is up to us, right? That when ruling authorities step outside of their boundaries of authority and begin to abuse authority, they are not only abusing the individuals who are the recipients of this unjust system, but they're also abusing the moral authority given to them by divine power. And so if the moral authority is being abused and disregarded, then we have no obligation to participate in obedience to such. So with that being the case, it is critically important for us to be truthful and honest that in our world today, we have a responsibility to hold people accountable, to hold systems accountable, to hold individuals accountable, to hold states accountable to operating according to their original and divine design. Divine design. Now, I'm going to go on with this next week. I'll come back and talk again, but I'm going to come to an end right now because I don't want to go too long. But here's something that I want all of my listeners and those who are watching me on YouTube to understand, that it is time for us as believers, those who confess this Christian doctrine or Christian message, that you ought to read and look at the story of Jesus and take it into personal application. That the spirituality that you and I exhibit means no good if it cannot be used on the streets in everyday life. That what we read about in scriptures and the stories and the narratives we read about in the New Testament mean us no good if we can't take the moral principles from those stories and narratives and apply them to our time and into our day. And so once again, I want to say to you, please read the text, right? Understand the text. If you have questions, put them down in the comment section so that we can deliberate about it and talk more. And we will come back and finish up with this next week. So once again, y'all, thank you so much for watching the show. Please make sure that you give us a like. Please make sure that you share, show us some love here on Facebook, on YouTube. Let us know that, okay, you're tracking, we're good. And please, all of these things help us to continue to get this message out, to continue to tell the truth, to continue to take the scripture and use it the way that it was meant to use to upbuild and uplift society. So please make sure you make a comment below. If you have questions that you want to send a personal email to me, it is Next Evolution 2022, Next Evolution 2022 at gmail.com. I'll put the little link right here. And please make sure that if you have questions, just email me there. Make sure you watch the next video that's going to be here or there. And make sure you subscribe as well. And I look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.